Hello, I'm John Grom, and this is the Right and Left Discussion Forum. Right and Left is a nonprofit corporation committed to the promotion of civil political discourse. The sole purpose of Right and Left is to urge the general public to become a more insistent conscience in the political process through respectful dialogue and a willingness to find common ground. We have just come through one of the most bitter campaign seasons in recent memory, and it has infected us from top to bottom. Our panel is going to discuss some of the differences between the political left and right, and hopefully reveal that we are not all that far apart, and that many of our stereotypes are without merit. Our panelists today begin with Ron Chamberlin. Ron is a retired senior research chemist, musician, wood artisan, photographer, and all-around Renaissance man. On his left is Sharon Ray. Sharon is a member of the Republican State Central Committee and former Medina County Commissioner. On Sharon's left is Mike Kovack. Mike is our current Medina County Auditor. On his left is Jerry Ritzman, Vice President and partner of Ritzman Pharmacies. I'd like to start our discussion with Ron Chamberlin. Ron, we just came through a number of political campaigns where discussions of actual political philosophy lost out to personal attacks. When you think about the political philosophies of the left and the right, what differences do you see?
Well, John, that's a pretty intriguing question, really. And I'm a registered Democrat, and I find myself espousing and feeling comfortable with liberal causes, not only the sort of social one, as in gay rights and that sort of thing, but also on the political aspect. When I think of the people I know, people who say they are conservative or who say they are liberal, I don't see a lot of difference between us. We seem to want much of the same thing. We want some equality in the job thing. We want to have good housing. We want to educate our children. We want the government to take care of us in some ways. We want to be sure we have good roads, we have good schools. We want to be certain that our country is defended. When I think about between conservative and liberal, I see it's a matter of degree more than anything else. Now, as a liberal, I tend to want more government involvement, not less, when it comes to something like clean air and water. I'm in favor of the EPA. I'm in favor of putting regulations on polluters. I was trained as a chemist, and I worked for a company locally who was a major polluter of the water and the air. And eventually, some of those businesses were gone. Not necessarily because of regulations, because of profit situations, but it was there, and that's good. I had a discussion recently on Facebook with a young cousin of mine who is a Republican, voted for Mr. Romney, said, and at the end of it she put in a somewhat uncivil remark about Obama. I won't repeat it. So I said, don't be uncivil. And she said, I'm not being uncivil. I'm afraid for my children. I know several people, friends who might lose their jobs if we get rid of coal. I tried to reassure that coal was going to be king for a long time. It's going to give the bulk of our energy production for electrical generation in this country, and so on and so forth, and things of that sort. So I think, to summarize my ramble here, I think it's somewhat of a matter of degree, more or less government involvement.
Where do you come down, Sharon, as a diehard Republican?
And I am a diehard Republican. I am going to qualify that. But what I will say, the biggest difference I see between the direction of the two parties is responsibility. I think the Republican Party believes very strongly in individual responsibility, and the Democratic Party in societal responsibility. So, you got to determine which side of that equation you're on. Without people being individually responsible, you see, everyone always talks about these lawsuits. It's your fault, I was breaking into your house and I got hurt, so now I'm suing you. You hear those crazy stories, but some of them are true. So how much do you feel society is responsible for everything that happens to you? I mean, if you make poor choices, should we be responsible for your poor choices if I'm making good choices? If I bought a $250,000 house and I make $40,000 a year, and I can't make my mortgage, is it up to the responsible person to subsidize that? So where do you go with this? I mean, and I do agree that there are some differences as far as degree, but I think most people feel that you've got to take some responsibility for your individual choices.
So you would be thinking in terms of government being a little bit smaller.
Absolutely, absolutely. New York City just passed a regulation saying now that you're not allowed to even purchase a soda beverage over 16 ounces.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Now, what about the conservative Republican who's frugal and purchases a 24-ounce and then shares it with 4 people? Yeah, I mean, you see what I'm saying?
Republicans share.
Thanks for beating me to that comment, John.
But do you see what I'm saying about that is to be able to take your take away your individual right to make decisions like that for yourself. Mm-hmm. But with a lack of responsibilities, is society going to have to do that?
Mm-hmm. Mike, where do you come down?
Well, I think in general, most people aren't political. I think, again, the matter of degrees, and there's a lot of straw men set up there to be knocked down. Sharon just went through numerous, in my opinion. And the political parties, I mean, they attempt to drive votes by setting up these issues and getting people whipped up. But I think most people in general, if you just ask straight up, we don't want government in our lives. We don't want parents. We don't want authority in our lives, most of us. But we also don't want to have our water polluted. We also don't want to have, any number of things happen, and government is the only avenue to achieve those. So even on the question of public education, but political parties win by emphasizing setting up these things to be against and driving those home. But in general, I think that the country's moderate. I mean, it's neither left nor right. Mm-hmm. And I think a big problem that we're having, you see it in Ohio, but it's also across the nation in these redistricting things, which was issue 2 this year. Mm-hmm. Everybody's always gerrymandered the congressional seats so you can get more either Republicans or Democrats. But in the age of computers, we're now gerrymandering down to the household level, where used to it wasn't that fine. And what that does is it gives us more extremists on both sides of the aisle. And the solutions to our problems do not stand at either extreme. They are dead center in the middle. And not only the state, but the country would be much better served to have congressional districts, representative districts, where either party has a chance. I mean, right now, because you've got Republican districts and Democratic districts, we are electing the most conservative Republicans and the most liberal Democrats, and they're espousing ideologies rather than solutions to problems. So that is a tremendous problem that I would, I think we're going to have a problem until we fix that. So.
Can I make a comment on that real quick? And we talk about the redistricting and things, but in order to give each district equal opportunity, you would have to include the urban areas with the suburban areas. And would one representative be able to serve the needs of both groups adequately?
Well, I think typically what you're talking about is keeping governmental units together. I mean, I think Summit County right now is divided into 4 districts, and there's no representatives from Akron. I mean, you've stripped Akron of representation in the state government, which, it's one of the 8 big cities in Ohio. So I don't think you need to do that, but you would think that, Dave Hall's district runs from Holmes County up to Valley City. I saw him at a parade in Valley City. I go, what the heck are you doing here, Dave? Because new district. It's like, it's gotten out of control. And again, everyone's always done it. It's not a Republican thing.
Right.
It's not a Democrat. In fact, the Democrats failed to pass legislation prior to the 2010 elections because they thought they were going to control it. So, there's enough blame to go around, but let's forget about the blame and let's see what that does to us. Yeah. It gives us extremists on both sides of the aisle, and our solutions have always been in the middle. Maybe a little bit this way, a little bit that way, but I think we as a people, again, most people don't care about politics except for 2 months out of the year. But we are not addressing the problems of this state and country because of that, I think.
When I think about the map being covered with red states and blue states and thinking that most of them are close to 50-50, and ththese are not red and blue. They're purple and so forth. But Jerry, where do you come down?
Well, I would, just a quick comment, Mike, I agree with you on that, the extremes being elected and solutions not being sought seems to be a common occurrence. But as far as you're back to your original question, John, about what I see as the difference between the liberal and the conservative philosophy is how much do you want government involved in your life and in your business. And I would say the one side has the view that government has the answers and the solutions and can come up with the solutions to the situations and solve them by regulation and oversight. And where the other side would say, set out the parameters and let us work at it, and if we violate those, or if we don't meet those standards, then come in and make us meet those standards, rather than proactively doing things in your personal life and your business that take up so many resources to comply with. And I'm coming at this from the medical industry or the pharmacy business, is that the amount of regulations and the amount of standards that we're continuing to have to meet ahead of time are just really beginning to be quite a costly portion of our business, where it's taken all that money and resources to comply rather than to deliver care to patients. And I think that's in about any industry. So it's how much do you want government involved? I had a conversation a couple years ago with a Democrat from the area, and he said, we need regulation, and we do. We need regulation. We cannot be totally deregulated. And he said, it's like the government is the referee at the game, making sure that people play by the rules. And I can agree with that. But however, it seems so many times that the government is not only the referee, but it's actually playing in the game and actually calling the plays. And that's when I think it steps over the line and becomes a big burden, particularly on business, and takes away our choices. And so that's what I think.
Well, oddly enough, when you think back to the establishment of a lot of our regulations, the EPA, the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, were all Republican initiatives. These came about in the Nixon administration. Of course, politicians always try to win the vote of the people that just voted against them, so, and it came from that. But Mike, you were...
Yeah, I was going to say, again, to put it out that Democrats are in favor of more government intervention. I think most of the time that these regulations arise, it's not because someone came up with a good idea. It's typically because a problem has arisen and needs to be addressed. And the question is, how do we address that? The private markets are not built to address problems like that, such as water pollution, et cetera, because that's not what they're there to do. They're there to earn money for the corporation. And so, I think just to characterize it that the Democrats want to be out there regulating everything, I think they're aware that they want to prevent harm to large groups of individuals, and that's where your regulations come from. And I think, we talk about common points of interest. I think most of us can agree with that. The problem always comes down to implementation, right?
Well, and I think one other thing you said, to prevent harm from large groups of people. Now, and it depends on how you defend large groups or define large groups. If your child has a peanut allergy, and I had somebody call me about this when I was a commissioner, I would like you to pass some type of regulation, which we couldn't do anyway, to force every restaurant, everyone who sells food, to post every ingredient that is in their food, and also to require all their employees to take a class so that they can help people. And it's like, you know what? Unfortunately, that's an individual responsibility issue. It is not a societal issue. But in New York City, they passed something very similar to that.
But it becomes a societal issue because it becomes a health issue. It becomes a thing that spreads over the entire country, not an individual state or an individual community. We have these multinational and widespread corporations. The food industry is a very good example of that. And we have an epidemic of obesity here. Yeah, it's our personal opinion of how much we eat and what we eat, but we have to know.
Well,
And
so
I
you're
think
saying
that's-
that we should limit the amount of high-calorie foods if you're over a certain body fat percentage or
No,
certain
I'm
weight?
saying that we should make sure people are aware. Now, I think we're all on a continuum here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have issues in which I would be very comfortably in a conservative camp. I have issues in which I'm much more liberal, and I think probably everybody's in there. And as Mike says, it kind of balances out. We're in the middle. We're moderate. And if you average it all up, some of us are a little bit more on one side or the other. I'm a little bit more on the liberal side. But I think people need to know. I agree with you that we're responsible for our own actions. We're responsible for being compassionate. We're responsible for being loving to our fellow man, and that has to be reflected in our government. It hasn't been reflected historically in our corporations because they're responsible to their stockholders. And as Jerry says, nobody's going to, or was it Mike who said nobody's going to worry about water pollution because it costs money to clean it up. So I think, again, government regulation, all of us acting together to protect each other, I think is very important.
I was, on the government regulation thing, I was talking about, I guess I didn't refer to it on a more microscopic basis, rather than water, air pollution, and that type of thing. Why is it necessary for Health and Human Services for me to sell durable medical equipment, for them to tell me what type of human resource records I need to keep? Other than the fact that they don't want somebody that is a convicted felon working in that, I can see that. But they go down to the minute detail of the type of records we need to keep, where we have to have exit signs, how many flashlights we have to have available in case the power goes out. Probably did that anyway before that. But to be certified to do that, you have to meet those minute requirements, and I can't see where that relates to how well that I can supply durable medical equipment to a person.
Yeah.
You know, if I start not doing a good job of that, they can take my right away to supply that because they're paying for the goods, but they don't have to tell me what records to keep.
Yeah. I think that regulation concerns people when they start to feel overregulated, like you pointed out. Now, I'm not a typical conservative. I'm a Jeffersonian liberal, which is the same thing as a
Aren't we
Reagan
all?
Republican, I guess. However,
You
when
don't
I-
want to say that, John. there's a new book out about Jefferson. So you may want to retract that later.
well, I guess my point is that, and to Jerry's point, it's very, very difficult to start the regulation ball rolling without it just going on and on and on. Jerry, as you know, at our church, we started a preschool 6 years ago, I think. There are 62 pages of state regulations now. And when I remember back, many years back, there was a woman in Cleveland who was doing daycare. And they found that she was keeping children in dog kennels, things. So up until that time, there was never any regulation. Now they get together once a year and pile regulation on top of regulation, and some of them are quite amazing.
And I'll just jump in here real quickly. That overregulation, I don't know if we can ascribe that to the right or the left. I think that's some bureaucratic.
Yes.
It doesn't matter.
Once you've created the monster.
Once the bureau
yeah.
is there, the bureaucracy is there, I think it feeds on itself.
Yeah, but to Ron's point, I think it has to be done. We're not going to regulate it.
No.
I grew up next to the Kovack River, so I can tell you, we need regulation when it comes to clean water.
Imagine the fuss when we had to take phosphorus out of the detergents.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. But also say on the regulations, I mean, again, we talk about personal responsibility and we hear about these horror stories, but quite frankly, if you have inane regulations or regulations that don't make sense, typically there are procedures to follow those back up and have something done about them. And typically they're hard to do, but we want to talk personal responsibility. If something's wrong, do something about it. And you know, and typically if it really is inane and you expose it to the public, you know, that typically brings action. I used to have people tell me you can't fire someone in the Navy. I did. It was not easy, but you know, you need to follow the rules and the guidelines that are in effect to change it. I mean, all of us talking about personal responsibility. If there's something wrong, for heaven's sakes, stand up, raise your hand, and let's try to fix it.
But Mike, you said it yourself, and so many people are only concerned with politics or only want to hear about it for a couple months a year.
No, but this is not politics. This is your business. This is the daycare. It's like, you know, excuse me, why do I have to do this? And somebody better have that answer. I mean, I'm all in favor of challenging authority, and a good authority will get you an answer. Bad authority will push you off. But
It just becomes such an overwhelming. I agree that it needs to be done. You need to continue to fight when there's something like that going on. But it is such a huge process to affect change.
Yeah. Let me add another element to this conversation. In recent times, political discourse has become less friendly than any time in my memory. And when I think about the standoffs and the gridlock in Washington, I don't ever remember growing up that we've had so many problems that way. And in thinking back to what's the difference? When did things start to change? And I want to try this idea on you. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was supported about 80%, 20% by Republicans, 60-20 by Democrats. Before you get all excited, it was supported not at all by the Democrats in the Old South, in the states of the old Confederacy. It was supported well over 90% by the Northern Democrats. Then the Southern Democrats, who were out of favor, became Republicans. All right, and now you had a change. Before that, the Republican Party had both liberals and conservatives. The Democrat Party had liberals and conservatives. They don't do that anymore. The Republicans are all conservative. The Democrats are all liberal. And they don't have that kind of interchange that they used to have. Pile on top of that the Newt Gingrich revolution, when all these freshman Republicans came in, when Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House, he advised them all, don't live in Washington. Go home on the weekends. We'll just have you here 3 days a week, and then you go home. Now they stopped all of the interchange and the socializing, didn't go to the same Little League games together and go to the PTA meetings. They didn't know each other. They show up on Tuesday in Congress and look across the aisle at somebody they haven't seen since last Thursday, and they're just not that kind of interaction that there used to be. And I've heard some people credit that with this cleavage that we've got now.
I've read that same thing, and I was very heartened by our representative, Mr. Renacci, when a couple of years ago, he started a group in Congress to get two sides together and meet on an informal basis. And I don't know how Hill is going with that. He had 20 or so folks involved with that from the beginning. But I think that kind of thing is good. I've heard the same analysis, you say, not in such detail with statistics, which that's very impressive. But
I have a good memory.
You're right about.
I think we remember the things that have happened most recently. If we do any historical reading about presidential campaigns from the beginning of the presidential campaigns, they were absolutely make today's look like a Sunday school picnic because of the slurs, the outright accusations made one against another.
Jackson's wife was called a prostitute.
I know we're not where we want to be, but I don't think that they were all these pristine, gentlemanly campaigns that we might have in our mind. They were pretty rough.
Yeah, they certainly were.
I often think it would be interesting if we would pass some type of campaign regulation where you're allowed to say whatever you like as long as you don't ever mention your opponent or anything about it. You can talk about your cat, your dog, your policies, your philosophies, your beliefs, but you can't say a word about the other candidate. And I think we might be further along if we took that kind of philosophy.
We've got just a few seconds left. I wanted to just ask you about this. This is an idea of mine when I was watching the debates, and somebody else brought it up as well. How would you feel about a debate where each contestant was in a booth and they were able to speak for 3 minutes and their mic was shut off, and then go to the next guy and let him talk?
Most politicians would have a heart attack.
Well, listen, I want to thank you all for this spirited debate, but it's a very civil one, which is what I was hoping for. And I want to thank the audience for joining us, and I hope that you saw a change from the obnoxious rhetoric that we've become so used to in political discussions. Our goal is to show that reasonable people can have reasonable discussions about potentially contentious topics. To learn more about Right and Left, please visit our temporary website, which is rightandleft.org. I'll repeat that, rightandleft.org. Or to become a volunteer or to make a monetary contribution to this nonprofit corporation, contact me, John Grom, at 330-336-2213. And thank you for joining us.